Our gospel reading today is taken from the gospel according to Matthew in chapter 9, beginning at verse 35 through chapter 10, verse 8. This is Matthew 9 and 35. Listen to what the Spirit might speak into your life in this reading from the gospel of Matthew. Then Jesus went all about the cities and the villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest." Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples, and he gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness. These are the names of those 12 apostles. First, Simon, also known as Peter, and his brother Andrew, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Canaan, and Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions: do not take any road that leads to Gentiles, and do not enter a Samaritan town, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, proclaim the good news that the kingdom of heaven has come near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those with a skin disease, cast out demons. You received without payment, give without payment. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And our second reading I find much humor in. I think it's a good one. This is a reading from the book of Genesis. This is Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 15, and then chapter 21, verses 1 through 6. This is the story of Abraham and Sarah. Genesis 18:1. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and he saw 3 men standing near him, and he bowed down to the ground, and he ran from the tent entrance to meet them. He said, "Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought to wash your feet, and rest yourselves in the shade of the tree. Let me bring you a little bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to visit your servant." So they did. So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah, and he said to her, "Quick, make ready 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make it into cakes." And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared, and he set it before them, and he stood beside them under the shade of the tree while they ate. And they said to him, "Where's your wife, Sarah?" And he said, "There in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah will have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old, my husband is old, shall I be fruitful?" And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I bear an infant now that I am old?' Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time I will return to you in due season, and Sarah will have a child." But Sarah denied it, and she said, "Oh, I didn't laugh." He said, "Yes, you did laugh." The Lord dealt with Sarah as he said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham gave the son the name Isaac, which means child of laughter. And Abraham circumcised Isaac when he was 8 days old, and as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Now Sarah said, God has brought me laughter at last, and everyone who hears my story will laugh with me. Amen. You don't hear much in the Bible about laughter, do you? And when you do hear about laughter, it's usually derisive laughter. But here we've got laughter for laughter's sake. And laughter takes center stage, so much so that the new character that's introduced is named Child of Laughter. And so though we tried to have a Holy Humor Sunday, the Sunday after Easter, to mixed reviews, I don't want to repeat that again today, but I do want to think about laughter and the power that it has in our lives and the beauty and the joy that it gives us. Think of a person whose laugh you will never forget. A living person, a real person, or a TV character. Of course, my mind goes to the minor character Janice in Friends. Nobody remembers her. Okay. A laugh is as distinctive as a voice. What makes you laugh? When have you laughed so hard that tears came to your eyes? How many times in your life have you laughed so hard that you just had to stop what you were doing and let it go? 30? 40? We don't let ourselves laugh like that very often, do we? Have you ever had to park your car because you were laughing so hard at something you heard on the radio or something somebody said to you? Have you ever had to step out of a church or a concert hall or some other venue, a classroom, because you just couldn't control your laughter? That's the kind of laughter I hope we're talking about in this story. The beautiful kind, the healing kind, the kind that, at least in this story, redeems years of sadness and loss. Laughter is a healing force in our lives. Laughter produces dopamine and endorphins and a helpful little hormone called oxytocin, also known as the bonding hormone, because it produces feelings of trust and social connection. Do you know what else laughter is? Laughter is usually a recognition that I've got no control in this situation. I am not the one in charge here, and I'm just going to roll with it. And that, when we can do it, is a beautiful thing. That, when we can do it, when we can humbly admit that we've got no control over whatever's going on here, that's a freeing thing, and it's good for us. Sometimes in laughter we see our own silliness echoed back at us in the behaviors or the words of another person, or even in the shenanigans of some crazy cat on Instagram. I love the cat videos. When we laugh, we admit that we're not in control, that stuff arises to surprise us, to delight us, to sideswipe us with a big dose of irony. Here in Genesis, the aged Sarah laughs. When an angelic visitor or three visitors that are treated like one visitor say that she is to have a baby, it's just too preposterous. She's just too old. And then after having the baby, she names that child Isaac, the son of laughter. And she says, now, everyone who hears my story is going to laugh. This is weird stuff. This is funny stuff. Let's laugh about it together. In these deadly serious days, where everybody is taking themselves and everything else so seriously, maybe we are called to laugh a little harder and to help others into the joke. There are only a few lives that are devoid of laughter, not many. Once when I was a kid, I saw my grandmother mopping her kitchen floor, and she always mopped it on her hands and knees. No mop with a handle was good enough for her floor. She got down on the kitchen floor and she scrubbed it, that old linoleum. And she was under the kitchen table scrubbing the floor when she sneezed really hard. And her head hit the bottom of the table pretty hard. And then she reeled around and hit the leg of the table with her head. It was like something out of the Three Stooges. Except this was my grandma. And you know what she did? She sat down under the kitchen table on the wet floor and she laughed. And she laughed until I thought she was going to die. You've rarely seen a person laugh that hard, but it's a good and it's a healing thing. And to be able to laugh at yourself and your gaffes, that's a gift. You should see my wife and her sister when they get together. When the kids were little, they used to say, "Dad, please don't let Aunt Amy sit beside Mom." Because the laughter, it just gets unreal. These two sisters, they will just laugh. It usually happens like this. They'll start talking about someone they know that you don't know, that nobody knows but them, somebody from elementary school, I don't know. And they'll start to tell funny stories about these people. Then they'll start to giggle. Then they'll chortle, which is a step above giggling. And then they will laugh. They will throw their heads back like Muppets, and they will laugh so hard, their faces will turn red. It's the piercing, rattling pitch of it that sends children running and dogs fleeing. It has been the bane of many a waiter in a restaurant. But you know what? You can't be self-important when you're laughing like that. You can't be arrogant. You can't be full of yourself. You can't have evil intent. Of course, there is evil laughter, and we're going to talk about that. But it's hard to be bossy or cruel when you're really laughing with another person. Wouldn't we all be healthier if we learned to laugh a little more at ourselves and along with Sarah and with one another? I like this Bible story. It's a strange one. You've got these three strangers that Abraham addresses as a single person. These three strangers come to pay a call on Abraham and Sarah at their tent beneath the oak trees. And old father Abraham, who is old but not yet a father, he trips all over them. Do you notice what's the $10? The obsequious behavior, that's the $10 word. He wants to serve them. He wants to provide for all their needs. He wants to wash their feet. He says he's going to bring them bread, but he actually kills a cow and has it roasted. It only takes 6 or 8 hours. If you've ever traveled in the global south, then you've seen this kind of hospitality, haven't you? Here, sit in the shade of my tree for a few minutes. That really means sleep in my bed for 2 nights while I sleep on a cot in the kitchen. This text could easily be it could become a sermon about receiving the stranger. It could be about hospitality because we need such sermons in these times. But I am struck by Sarah's laughter and the trouble that it gets her into. Sarah's listening from the door of the tent, and she laughs when these 3 visitors or 1 visitor suggest that she is going to have a child. She laughs. It's just too ridiculous. And then the 3 visitors, who are now identified as the Lord, God by committee, very Presbyterian. Then the God in 3 persons says, "What's she laughing at? Why is Sarah laughing?" And she denies it. "Oh, no, I wasn't laughing. I spring allergies. I get this tickle in my throat. I was coughing. I was just coughing." And the visitors say, "No, you did laugh." Oh, just let her laugh. Let Sarah laugh. She's old and she's wanted to be a mother her whole life. And now she's finally told that she's going to get to be a mother. Let her laugh. Let her have her moment of joy. She's wept long enough. Let her laugh for the joy and the surprise of it. At the risk of staying too long in an excellent Bible story, because I know too much Bible tries people's patience. Let's talk about Isaac, this child of laughter. As patriarchs go in the Old Testament, Isaac was not one of the heavy hitters. He was not one of the most memorable patriarchs. His parents are major characters in the drama of Israel, and his own children, Jacob and Esau, will play pivotal roles, and his grandchildren will play really big roles, especially Joseph. And the 12 tribes of Israel will be named after Isaac's grandsons. But Isaac himself, the son of laughter, his footsteps die out early in the sacred text. He's a conduit for better things to come. He's a link in the chain. I don't know, maybe he just never got over the thing that happened to him on Mount Moriah. It's called the binding of Isaac. Do a Google image search of the binding of Isaac. Get the one by Caravaggio. It's when Abraham tied Isaac up and was ready to sacrifice him to God. It's really kind of a horrible story that we'll be dealing with in a few weeks. But at least in Caravaggio's Binding of Isaac painting, you see the horror and the despair and the betrayal on Isaac's young face. A trip to Dairy Queen is not going to fix what his father tried to do to him. Perhaps that childhood trauma knocked the wind right out of his sails, and that's why we hear so little about him. The son of laughter lived in the shadow of his father and his children and his grandchildren. Isaac lived a long, quiet life in tents and in pastures. The son of laughter never got to see the promises fulfilled. But really, isn't it enough to be given your role in the big drama of life and of love and of history? Isn't it enough to be one of the grand cast of characters who are chosen to bring it all about? That's all most of us get. Isaac was born of laughter. His very existence was laughable, for none imagined that he could ever be. He never seemed all that special, and he didn't do much that we can point to, but his life was born of the overflow of God's joy and, dare I say, God's laughter, God's mirth, God's overflowing love. And I would suggest that we are all born of God's laughter, born of God's joy, born of God's overflowing love. And what gets us in trouble is that we forget. We forget to laugh. We forget to look for the joy and the laughter and the beauty and the light. We get sidetracked by other things. Now, everyone who hears my story, Sarah declares, everyone who hears this story, they're going to laugh. They're going to laugh right beside me. You know, I know what you might be thinking. Laughter, like most good things, can have a shadow side. Its very blessedness is the exact thing that can make it sound so horrible when it happens at the wrong time, when it's misused. There's critical laughter, there's derisive laughter, there's mocking laughter. There's bullying laughter. There's nervous laughter, which is maybe the worst of all. There's maniacal laughter, like the laugh of a cartoon witch, or an evil scientist, or a villain in a superhero movie. But it only sounds so awful to us sometimes because we know in our hearts that it's supposed to be a good thing. It's supposed to be a comforting thing, laughter. Laughter is kind of like family and marriage and faith and Christmas. They're supposed to be so good that when they don't go the way we want, they actually hurt more than they would otherwise. Laughter's the same way. It's supposed to be a thing of beauty, and when it's not, that cruel laughter violates something pure. We too are children of laughter, born of the overflow of God's delight and God's joy and God's love. Don't all living things spring from God's simple mirth? God's creative play, God's own good pleasure. We're born of laughter, you and I. For though the world is fraught with danger and woe and fear, joy is the purpose of these lives. God's joy and our joy. That's the Westminster Shorter Catechism. We spring from joy. And I'd venture a guess that when the lights go out, we return to the joy that is our source. We exist for it. God's joy and ours. Joy overflowing. Our source, our goal, our human lot. Just as out of sheer joy, Abraham opened his home to 3 strangers, or 1 stranger, I don't know, who turned out to be God, so we with our laughing hearts are called to open ourselves, our lives, our resources, our time, our very homes, to the strangers with whom we share this dusty journey. In all their variations, all their brokenness, and all their pain, in all their arrogance and all their self-importance, they were all of them, every human being created for joy. But we wander so far from what we're created for. Their Creator takes pleasure in them, and so should we. But it's hard sometimes. We forget the joy for which we are created, and we settle for so much less. We don't often feel like children of joy, do we? When was the last time you felt like a child of joy? We feel like children of need, children of responsibility, children of pride, children of the ego. When we lose track of our life's joy, we become the unhappy servants, not even the children, but the servants, to appearances and to station and to status. We let ourselves be ruled not by joy, but by regret, anger, fear, desire. All these things rush in and they stifle our laughter. When you spend the greater part of your life either working or sleeping, when you spend more time on your morning and afternoon commute than you spend on your relationships, when you're confronted daily with more and more news of atrocities committed against the weakest of the earth, how can you help but lose touch with the joy that is meant to be our lot? And when my misguided pursuit of happiness crosses its kite strings with your counterproductive pursuit of happiness, things are going to get tangled and they're going to crash. Conflict replaces joy too often. And the greater the joy at stake, probably the greater the conflict. Much of the time we're just surviving, treading water. We laugh when we can. Sometimes you just gotta laugh. But where's the joy that is really meant to be our lot? What about beauty? What about leisure? What about the subtle curative powers of art? What about relationships? We are all neglecting some very good relationships that we ought to be attending to a little better. What about frivolousness? What about board games? What about puzzles? Walks in the park, walks with your dog. What about an hour a week in church just to be reminded that life doesn't have to be about all the ugly stuff? That gaining and achieving, it's not what stuff is supposed to be about. What about acts of mercy and service? What about Sabbath? How do we wander so far from the light? How do we come to live for the wrong things? When we are children of laughter, we should be laughing more, all of us. When we spend most of our waking hours struggling to keep up with the lives that we think we're supposed to be living for ourselves and our children, of course we will forget that it's about joy. Child of laughter, where's your joy? Does it get lost and crowded out among all the other things that seemed so urgently important at the time? You are a child of laughter, a creation of God's overflowing joy. Everyone's going to laugh when they hear my story, Sarah says. They're going to laugh along with me. Has laughter ever been a bridge between you and a person very unlike yourself? Has laughter ever healed something inside of you? Maybe our task as Christians in this day of stress and fear and misunderstanding is to take a deep breath, find the humor, and laugh more than we are doing. Laughing calls us back to our holy hidden hearts, to the best things that we hold inside of us, because you can't really laugh when you're full of yourself. And you can't really laugh if you intend anybody any harm. Laughter is medicine for our souls. It brings us back to the fact that we are born of joy, of God's delight overflowing, created for joy, destined for joy. In these deadly serious days, let's laugh. Along with Sarah, along with our neighbors, let's draw others into the joke. Let's not take it all too seriously. Let's rediscover laughter. Amen.